When you stop chasing a narcissistic woman, something subtle yet profound occurs beneath the surface of the relationship. The dynamic that once felt fixed begins to shift. In every pursuit, there is an unspoken hierarchy, one who seeks and one who is sought. The narcissistic personality depends on this asymmetry. Your pursuit confirms her desirability, reinforces her control, and feeds the identity she has constructed around being wanted. The moment you withdraw that pursuit, the structure destabilizes. Silence replaces reassurance. Distance replaces validation. And what once seemed like confidence in her begins to reveal itself as dependence on your attention. This is not about punishing her or playing games. It is about removing yourself from a psychological arrangement that required you to remain beneath her in order for it to function. As Carl Jung suggested, what we feed grows stronger, and what we starve begins to wither. When you stop feeding the dynamic, you interrupt the illusion of power. Suddenly, the one who appeared dominant must confront uncertainty. And in that uncertainty, the balance shifts. Power was never in the chasing. It was in the willingness to walk away. When you stop chasing, you are not simply withdrawing attention. You are interrupting her primary source of psychological fuel. A narcissistic woman does not experience admiration the way a secure person does. For her, validation is not pleasant, it is necessary. It regulates her fragile self-image. It shields her from the quiet, unspoken fear of inadequacy that she cannot consciously face. Your pursuit once functioned as proof that she is desirable, powerful, irreplaceable. Every message you sent, every attempt to win her over, reinforced that internal narrative. But when you become still, when you no longer seek her approval, something destabilizing happens. The mirror she was using to admire herself disappears. This is often the moment when she reappears, not always with vulnerability, but with subtle gestures. Curiosity, sudden warmth, strategic attention. It is not necessarily love returning. It is equilibrium being restored. She is attempting to secure the supply that stabilized her identity. As Carl Jung observed, the ego defends itself most aggressively when it feels threatened. Your withdrawal creates that threat, and in doing so, it reveals a truth. The power you thought she possessed was sustained by your participation. When you stop feeding the illusion, you discover that her control was borrowed, and you have the right to reclaim it. What makes this dynamic so difficult to leave is not love in its pure form, but the psychological mechanism known as the trauma bond. It is created through inconsistency. Affection followed by withdrawal, warmth followed by coldness. The human nervous system becomes conditioned by unpredictability. You begin to crave the moments of validation precisely because they are rare. The scarcity intensifies their perceived value. When you stop chasing, you interrupt this cycle of intermittent reinforcement. You remove yourself from the emotional roller coaster that kept you attached. At first, this feels uncomfortable. There may be anxiety, even a sense of loss. But what you are actually experiencing is withdrawal from a pattern, not from love. The bond was maintained by tension, not by intimacy. As Carl Jung emphasized, unconscious patterns govern us until we bring them into awareness. The trauma bond thrives in unconscious repetition. The moment you recognize it and step back, the spell begins to weaken. Clarity replaces confusion. You start to see the relationship not as destiny, but as conditioning. And here lies your liberation. When you stop chasing, you are not losing her. You are breaking the chain that kept you emotionally captive. Once you withdraw, do not assume the story simply ends. Very often, it enters a new psychological phase. A narcissistic woman who senses the loss of control may begin to test whether your detachment is genuine. These tests are rarely direct. They appear as coincidences, a sudden message, a subtle compliment, a carefully placed image meant to provoke jealousy, an unexpected display of warmth. On the surface, it seems spontaneous. Beneath the surface, it is diagnostic. She is measuring your emotional availability. Understand what is happening here. The narcissistic ego struggles with rejection because rejection threatens its constructed superiority. If you no longer chase, she must determine whether she still has access to your attention. Any reaction, anger, curiosity, nostalgia, reassures her that the bond remains intact. Your response becomes confirmation. As Carl Jung reminded us, what is not integrated within the self seeks control externally. These tests are attempts to regain that external control. When you refuse to react impulsively, you step out of the experiment entirely. The real transformation occurs not when she tests you, but when you no longer feel compelled to pass or fail. Mastery is proven in silence. When you stop chasing, an unexpected silence enters your life. At first, that silence can feel empty. You were accustomed to thinking about her, analyzing her moods, anticipating her reactions. Your mental energy revolved around maintaining connection. But once you withdraw, that energy returns to you. And this is where something remarkable begins. Chasing someone who withholds affection slowly fragments your identity. You adjust your behavior to avoid conflict. You filter your words to maintain approval. Over time, you begin to measure your worth through her responses. When you step back, you interrupt that erosion. You create space to ask a deeper question. Who am I when I am not seeking validation? As Carl Jung argued, individuation is the process of becoming whole, of integrating the parts of ourselves that were suppressed in order to belong. By no longer chasing, you begin that process. You reconnect with ambitions, friendships, discipline, and purpose that were neglected. Your confidence stops depending on her attention and starts resting on your own alignment. The rebuilding is not loud. It is quiet and internal, but it is powerful. Because the moment you reclaim your identity, you realize you were never meant to orbit around someone else's gravity. What ultimately unsettles a narcissistic woman is not your anger, not your arguments, not even your departure. It is your indifference. Anger still signals attachment. Debate still signals investment. But indifference communicates something far more disruptive. You are no longer seeking anything from her. True indifference is not coldness. It is emotional sovereignty. It is the state in which your sense of worth is no longer negotiated through another person's approval. When you reach this point, the psychological grip dissolves. You stop monitoring her behavior. You stop interpreting her silence. You stop hoping for closure. And in that detachment, you become unpredictable to someone who once believed. She understood your emotional triggers completely. As Carl Jung suggested, freedom begins when we withdraw projections and reclaim the energy we placed onto others. Indifference is the withdrawal of projection. You are no longer seeing her as the source of your fulfillment or your pain. You see her simply as she is: human, flawed, limited. And here is the final truth: the moment you genuinely no longer need to win, you have already won.